My name is Kaylee. I'm 35 years old, and I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like until my wedding day. There I was sitting in my car after what should have been the happiest moment of my life, staring at my wedding dress that was now stained with tears and humiliation. My 8-year-old daughter Emma was sleeping peacefully in the back seat, completely unaware that her mother's world had just collapsed. I never imagined that the man I was about to marry would stand by while his mother invited his ex-girlfriend to humiliate me on what should have been our special day. Let me take you back to where this all started. 2 years ago, I was a single mother barely making ends meet. Emma's father had walked out when she was just 2 years old, leaving us with nothing but broken promises and unpaid bills. I was working 2 jobs, one as a receptionist during the day and waitressing at night just to keep our tiny one-bedroom apartment and put food on the table. Every penny counted, and there were nights I went to bed hungry just to make sure Emma had enough to eat. Those were the hardest years of my life. Emma would spend long hours with the babysitter while I worked, and the guilt ate at me every single day. I wanted to give her everything a little girl deserved, but all I could offer was love and the promise that somehow we would make it through together. She never complained, not once. Even at 6 years old, she seemed to understand our situation better than most adults. It was during one of our rare Saturday morning outings to the local coffee shop that I met Brandon. Emma and I had saved up enough money for 2 hot chocolates and a shared muffin, and we were sitting by the window when this tall, handsome man approached our table. He had noticed Emma coloring in her little book and complimented her artwork. The smile on her face when he said her drawing of our apartment looked like a castle was worth everything to me. Brandon was different from any man I had ever met. He was 37, a successful architect with his own firm, and he drove a car that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. But what struck me most was how genuinely interested he seemed in Emma. He didn't just tolerate her presence like most men I had briefly dated. He actually engaged with her, asking about her favorite subjects in school and listening intently to her answers. We started meeting at that coffee shop every Saturday morning. Brandon would bring architectural sketches to show Emma, teaching her about buildings and design while I watched them bond. For the first time since her father left, I saw Emma light up around a male figure. After a month of these casual meetings, Brandon finally asked me out on a proper date. He even arranged for his sister to babysit Emma, insisting that he wanted our first evening together to be special. The next year was like living in a fairy tale. Brandon was everything I had dreamed of in a partner. He was patient with my hectic schedule, understanding about my financial limitations, and most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about Emma. He would pick us up for weekend activities, take us to parks I could never afford to visit, and slowly but surely, he became a fixture in our lives. Emma adored him. She started calling him Uncle Brandon, and he would help her with homework, read her bedtime stories when he stayed over, and even attended her school events when I had to work. For the first time since her father abandoned us, I began to believe that maybe we could have the complete family Emma deserved. But even during those blissful months, there were small warning signs that I chose to ignore. Brandon was always vague when I asked about his family. He mentioned his mother lived in the wealthy part of town, but always seemed uncomfortable when I suggested meeting her. When I pressed him about it, he would change the subject or make excuses about her being too busy with her social commitments. After exactly 1 year of dating, Brandon proposed to me at the very coffee shop where we had first met. Emma was there, bouncing with excitement as he got down on one knee and asked both of us if we would be his family forever. The ring was beautiful, probably more expensive than anything I had ever owned, and when Emma threw her arms around both of us, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We decided to have a small, intimate wedding to keep costs manageable. I had exactly $3,000 saved up, money I had scraped together by working extra shifts and cutting every possible expense. Brandon said his mother would help with the arrangements, and foolishly, I thought that meant she would be supportive and welcoming. How wrong I was about Patricia and her true intentions for our wedding day. Meeting Patricia for the first time should have been my first real warning about what lay ahead. Brandon had arranged for us to have lunch at an upscale restaurant in her neighborhood, the kind of place where the cheapest salad cost more than Emma and I usually spent on groceries for 3 days. Patricia arrived exactly on time, impeccably dressed, in what I later learned was a designer suit that cost more than my monthly rent. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair, styled to perfection, and the kind of jewelry that catches light from across a room. But it was her smile that should have warned me, cold and calculating, never quite reaching her eyes, as she looked me up and down, clearly assessing my worth. Her handshake was firm, but brief, as if she didn't want to touch me any longer than necessary. The conversation started pleasantly enough with Patricia asking about my work and background. But her questions felt more like an interrogation than getting to know her future daughter-in-law. She wanted to know about my previous marriage, my financial situation, my plans for the future, and most pointedly, how I intended to provide for Emma without depending on Brandon. When Emma grew restless and started coloring in her book, Patricia made her first cutting remark. "How wonderful that Brandon is so generous with his affections," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Not every man would be willing to take on such responsibility. The way she said responsibility made it clear she was referring to Emma, and I felt my daughter shrink back in her chair. Brandon, who should have defended us, simply smiled nervously and tried to change the subject. But Patricia was just getting started. She began discussing wedding plans without asking for my input, talking about venues I could never afford, and guest lists that included people I had never heard of. When I mentioned our modest budget, she waved her hand dismissively and said that she would handle the arrangements since she had experience with proper society events. Over the following weeks, Patricia took complete control of our wedding planning. She booked a venue at an exclusive country club, ordered flowers that cost more than my monthly salary, and insisted on a menu featuring foods I couldn't even pronounce. When I protested that this was far beyond what Brandon and I had discussed, she smiled that cold smile and said that she couldn't allow her son to have anything less than a perfect wedding. The guest list became a particular point of contention. Patricia kept adding names of her friends and social circle people who had no connection to Brandon and me whatsoever. When I asked who these people were, she explained that they were important business contacts and family friends who simply had to be included. I started feeling like a stranger at my own wedding. The situation with my wedding dress was equally humiliating. I had found a beautiful dress at a discount bridal store that fit perfectly within my budget. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and made me feel beautiful. When Patricia saw it, she pursed her lips and suggested that perhaps she could help me find something more appropriate for the venue. Her idea of appropriate involved a dress that cost 5 times what I could afford. Emma became another source of tension. Patricia believed that children should be seen and not heard, and she made it clear that Emma's role in the wedding should be minimal. She suggested that Emma could be a flower girl, but should disappear immediately after the ceremony. When Emma asked innocent questions about the wedding, Patricia would give her sharp looks that made my daughter retreat behind my legs. Brandon's response to his mother's behavior was what hurt me most. Instead of standing up for Emma and me, he would make excuses for Patricia's actions. He claimed she just wanted everything to be perfect, that she was used to handling big events, and that I should appreciate her help. When I tried to explain how excluded and belittled I felt, he would dismiss my concerns as wedding stress. The red flags were everywhere, but I was so desperate for Emma to have a father figure, and for us to be a real family, that I ignored every warning sign. I told myself that once we were married, things would be different. Patricia would have to accept me as her daughter-in-law, and Brandon would prioritize our new family over his mother's wishes. Looking back, I realized how naive I was about the dynamics I was walking into. As the wedding date approached, my anxiety grew stronger every day. Patricia had transformed what should have been our intimate ceremony into a grand social event, with over 200 guests, most of whom were strangers to me. She controlled every detail from the color of the napkins to the playlist for the reception, and I felt like a guest at my own wedding. The most troubling development was Patricia's mysterious additions to the guest list. She would mention names in passing, people she absolutely had to invite, but when I asked who they were, she would be vague about their connection to our family. There were hushed phone conversations that stopped when I entered the room, and knowing looks between Patricia and Brandon that made me feel like there was something they weren't telling me. It was during one of these conversations that I first heard the name Stephanie mentioned. Patricia was on the phone in the kitchen while I was helping Emma with her homework in the living room. I heard her say something about Stephanie being such a lovely girl and how it would be wonderful to see her again. When I asked Brandon about it later, he seemed uncomfortable and explained that Stephanie was just an old college friend. My curiosity got the better of me, and I did some investigating on social media. What I discovered made my stomach drop. Stephanie wasn't just any college friend, she was Brandon's longtime girlfriend throughout university. They had dated for 4 years, and from the photos I found, she was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, effortlessly elegant, and from the kind of wealthy family that belonged to country clubs and took vacations in Europe. When I confronted Brandon about why he hadn't mentioned that Stephanie was his ex-girlfriend, he seemed genuinely surprised that I cared. He explained that they had simply grown apart after college, when their career paths took them in different directions. There were no hard feelings, they occasionally exchanged Christmas cards, and he couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal about an old relationship. But Patricia's reaction when I mentioned knowing about Stephanie told a different story. Her eyes lit up with interest, and she made several comments about what a shame it was that things hadn't worked out between them. She mentioned Stephanie's successful career in marketing her beautiful downtown apartment and her involvement in various charitable organizations. It was clear that Patricia had preferred Stephanie to me, and I began to wonder if the mysterious phone conversations involved plans for Stephanie to attend our wedding. The week before the wedding, tensions in our household reached a breaking point. Brandon was working late every night, claiming he had to finish several projects before our honeymoon. Emma was excited about the wedding, but confused by the adult tensions she could sense but not understand. Patricia was making final arrangements with military precision, consulting guest lists and seating charts that she refused to show me. My wedding dress fitting was scheduled for 3 days before the ceremony, and Patricia insisted on accompanying me. When I tried on the dress I had chosen, she stood behind me in the mirror and suggested once again that we could still find something more suitable. The seamstress, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room, made the necessary adjustments while Patricia critiqued everything from the neckline to the length of the train. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Emma was staying with Brandon's sister, and the apartment felt eerily quiet. I tried calling Brandon, but he didn't answer, claiming later that he had been in meetings with last-minute wedding vendors. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. The final straw came that evening when Patricia called to go over last-minute details. She mentioned that there might be a few surprise guests, and that I should be prepared for a truly memorable day. When I asked what she meant by surprise guests, she laughed and said I would find out soon enough. The way she said memorable sent chills down my spine, but I convinced myself I was just experiencing normal pre-wedding nerves. The morning of my wedding day started with Emma jumping on my bed at 6 a.m, her excitement infectious despite my lingering anxiety. She helped me choose my makeup colors and insisted on braiding tiny flowers into my hair, a sweet gesture that reminded me why I was doing this in the first place. I wanted to give her the stable family life she deserved, and today was supposed to be the beginning of our new chapter. The venue looked absolutely stunning when we arrived. Patricia had indeed created something spectacular with white roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers hanging from the pavilion ceiling, and tables set with china that probably cost more per place setting than I made in a week. It was beautiful, but it felt like someone else's wedding, not mine. As guests began arriving, I realized just how many people I didn't recognize. Patricia's social circle descended upon the venue like a perfectly dressed invasion, all air kisses and expensive perfume. They looked at me with polite curiosity, clearly wondering who this unknown woman was who had captured Brandon's attention. I overheard several conversations about how surprising this match was and how different I seemed from his usual type. Emma looked absolutely beautiful in her flower girl dress, a pale pink creation that Patricia had selected. Despite everything, watching my daughter twirl in front of the mirrors in the bridal suite filled me with joy. She was so proud to be part of the ceremony, practicing her walk down the aisle and carefully protecting the basket of rose petals she would scatter. But as I was getting ready, I noticed something that made my heart sink. Patricia was directing the staff to set up additional place settings at the head table. When I asked her about it, she smiled mysteriously and said she wanted to make sure there was room for everyone who mattered. The way she emphasized everyone sent another wave of unease through me. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I have to admit. Walking down the aisle with Emma by my side, seeing Brandon waiting for me at the altar, I felt a moment of pure happiness. Maybe everything would work out after all. Maybe Patricia's controlling behavior would stop once we were officially married. Maybe Brandon would finally stand up to his mother and prioritize our family. Our vows were heartfelt and genuine. Brandon promised to love and protect both Emma and me, to be the father figure she had never had, and to build the kind of family we had all dreamed of. When we kissed after being pronounced husband and wife, I felt like maybe all the stress and anxiety had been worth it for this moment. The reception started smoothly enough. Our first dance was to a song Brandon had chosen, something romantic and sweet that made Emma clap from her seat at the children's table. I was finally beginning to relax and enjoy my wedding day when I noticed Patricia moving through the crowd with unusual energy, checking her watch frequently and glancing toward the entrance. During dinner, as we were eating the elaborate meal Patricia had selected, she stood up and tapped her champagne glass to get everyone's attention. My heart started racing because we hadn't planned any speeches beyond the best man and maid of honor. Patricia smiled at the crowd and announced that she had a special surprise for the happy couple. That's when my world collapsed. Through the entrance walked a woman who took my breath away, not because of her beauty, although she was stunning, but because of the way everyone in the room reacted to her presence. The entire reception seemed to pause as this tall, elegant blonde made her entrance, and Patricia's smile became triumphant as she gestured for the woman to join us at the head table. I knew immediately who this was. Stephanie looked exactly like her photos, but even more polished and confident in person. She wore a designer dress that complemented the wedding colors perfectly, almost as if she had coordinated with Patricia in advance. As she walked toward our table, I felt every eye in the room, watching to see how I would react to this carefully orchestrated humiliation. Patricia's voice rang out across the reception as she made her announcement. "Everyone, I'd like you to welcome Stephanie, Brandon's dear friend from college, who simply couldn't miss this special occasion." The way she emphasized dear friend made it clear that everyone in attendance knew exactly who Stephanie was and what her presence at this moment meant. Brandon's face went completely white as Stephanie approached our table. He stood up awkwardly, clearly as shocked as I was by her unexpected arrival. But what devastated me most was that he didn't ask her to leave, didn't question his mother's decision to invite her, didn't do anything to protect me from what was obviously a calculated attack on my dignity. Stephanie moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in this world of expensive clothes and social maneuvering. She approached me directly, extending a perfectly manicured hand and introducing herself with false warmth. "You must be Kaylee," she said, her voice smooth and cultured. "I've heard so much about you. How brave you are to take on such a big responsibility." The word responsibility hung in the air, just as it had when Patricia first used it to describe Emma months ago. I realized this wasn't a coincidence or a last-minute invitation. This was a coordinated effort to humiliate me in front of 200 guests to remind me that I was an outsider who didn't belong in Brandon's world. As Stephanie settled into the chair that had mysteriously been prepared for her at our head table, she began making casual conversation about her shared history with Brandon. She mentioned inside jokes from college mutual friends I had never heard of and family events I hadn't been invited to. With each story, she painted a picture of a life and connection with Brandon that predated me by decades. The other guests watched this performance with fascination. Some looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the cruelty of what was happening, but others seemed to be enjoying the drama. I could see people whispering behind their hands, pointing in our direction, and taking photos with their phones that would probably be all over social media within hours. Emma, thankfully, was still at the children's table and didn't understand what was happening. But I could see her looking in my direction with confusion, trying to understand why her mother looked so upset on what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. The situation escalated when Stephanie casually mentioned that she and Brandon had been in touch recently. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of text conversations that had been happening right up until our wedding week. Nothing inappropriate, she was quick to clarify, just old friends catching up. But the timing felt like a deliberate slap in the face. Patricia watched all of this unfold with undisguised satisfaction. She had orchestrated this moment, perfectly inviting Stephanie to arrive during the reception, when it would cause maximum disruption and humiliation. She kept making comments about how wonderful it was to have everyone who mattered to Brandon gathered in one place. Brandon remained paralyzed throughout this entire exchange. He sat between Stephanie and me like a deer caught in headlights, occasionally making weak attempts at small talk, but clearly overwhelmed by the situation his mother had created. When I tried to catch his eye, looking for some sign that he would intervene, he avoided my gaze entirely. The final insult came when Patricia suggested that Stephanie should say a few words about Brandon to the assembled guests. She stood up and began tapping her champagne glass again, preparing to hand over the microphone to the woman who represented everything I wasn't and could never be. I looked around the room and realized that everyone was waiting for me to break down. They expected me to cry, to run away, to crumble under the pressure of this public humiliation. Patricia's plan was working perfectly, and I could see the anticipation in her eyes as she prepared to watch me fall apart in front of everyone who mattered to her son. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt a surge of strength that I hadn't experienced since the day Emma's father walked out on us. I remembered all the nights I had worked double shifts to keep us afloat, all the times I had chosen to go hungry. so Emma could eat all the challenges I had already survived as a single mother. This woman and her manipulative games were nothing compared to what I had already endured. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor in the suddenly quiet reception hall. Every conversation stopped as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting to see how the humiliated bride would handle her public embarrassment. Patricia looked momentarily surprised that I was standing, but her expression quickly shifted back to smug satisfaction as she assumed I was about to make a scene. Instead, I walked calmly to where Patricia stood holding the microphone. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and clear as I took the microphone from her surprised hands. "I think I'd like to say a few words before Stephanie speaks." The confusion on Patricia's face was priceless as she realized her carefully orchestrated plan was about to go off script. I turned to face the crowd of guests, many of whom I was meeting for the first time at my own wedding reception. "Thank you all for being here today on this absolutely enlightening occasion." I began emphasizing the word enlightening in a way that made several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. It's not every bride who gets such a clear picture of what her future holds on her wedding day. A murmur went through the crowd as people began to realize that this wasn't going to be a traditional wedding speech. I saw Emma looking at me from the children's table, her 8-year-old face showing confusion, but also pride that her mother was speaking to all these important-looking adults. "Some of you might be wondering about the surprise appearance of Stephanie tonight." I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I have to admit I was surprised too, since neither my husband nor my new mother-in-law mentioned that she would be joining us at the head table for our wedding reception. Brandon was staring at me with a mixture of panic and disbelief. He started to stand up as if to interrupt me, but I held up my hand and continued speaking. The power I felt in that moment was intoxicating after months of being controlled and diminished by Patricia's manipulation. You see, I've spent the last few months watching Patricia plan what she called the perfect wedding, and I realize now that she was right. It is perfect, just not for the reasons I originally thought. I paused, letting my words sink in as the crowd hung on every syllable. This wedding has perfectly revealed the character of everyone involved. It's shown me a woman who would humiliate her son's bride in front of 200 guests just to maintain her own sense of control. I looked directly at Patricia as I said this, watching her face turn red with fury as she realized she was being exposed. It's shown me a man who would stand by silently while his mother destroys what should be the happiest day of his new wife's life. Now I turned to Brandon, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Several guests were nodding in agreement, clearly recognizing the truth in what I was saying. And it's shown me that I have more strength than I ever realized. I continued, my voice growing more confident with each word. Because a woman who has raised a beautiful daughter on her own, who has worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, who has survived abandonment and poverty, and fought for every good thing in her life, is not going to be broken by social games and petty humiliation. The applause started slowly with just a few people clapping, but it grew as more guests realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Emma was beaming at me from across the room, not understanding all the adult complexities, but knowing that her mother was being strong and brave. "So I want to thank Patricia for this perfect wedding gift," I said, looking directly at my new mother-in-law, whose carefully composed facade had completely crumbled. "Because you've helped me realize that this marriage was a mistake before we even left the reception hall." The gasps from the crowd were audible now, but I wasn't finished. "I'll be filing for an annulment first thing Monday morning because I refuse to subject my daughter to a lifetime of watching her mother be treated with such disrespect." Stephanie, who had been used as a weapon in Patricia's game, looked genuinely embarrassed and uncomfortable. She clearly hadn't expected to be part of such a public confrontation, and I almost felt sorry for her for being manipulated into this situation. Brandon finally found his voice and stood up, reaching for my arm. "Kaylee, please, we can talk about this privately. Don't do this here in front of everyone." But his plea felt empty after he had remained silent through my entire humiliation. I pulled my arm away and spoke into the microphone one final time. "The time for private conversations was before your mother invited your ex-girlfriend to humiliate me at our wedding reception. I'm going to collect my daughter now, and we're going home to the life we've built together, the life where we're treated with love and respect." I handed the microphone back to a stunned Patricia and walked across the reception hall to collect Emma from the children's table. As we left the venue, I could hear the excited buzz of conversation erupting behind us, but I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, strong and capable and worthy of respect. The drive home from the wedding venue was quiet, except for Emma's gentle questions about what had happened. I explained to her in simple terms that sometimes adults make decisions that aren't right for everyone involved, and that we were going back to our apartment where we felt safe and loved. Her 8-year-old wisdom surprised me when she said, "Mommy, that lady was mean to you, and Brandon didn't tell her to stop. I'm glad we're going home." The legal process of getting the marriage annulled was surprisingly straightforward, especially given that we had clear evidence of misrepresentation and emotional distress. Brandon made several desperate attempts to contact me in the weeks following the wedding, leaving voicemails, begging me to reconsider, and claiming that he had no idea what his mother was planning. But his ignorance felt like another betrayal rather than an excuse. Patricia's social standing took a significant hit after her behavior at the wedding became the talk of her social circle. Several guests who had witnessed her orchestrated humiliation reached out to me expressing their disgust at what she had done. Word spread quickly through her country club and charitable organization circles that she had deliberately sabotaged her son's wedding, and the social consequences were severe. Interestingly, Stephanie contacted me about 2 weeks after the wedding to apologize for her role in Patricia's scheme. She explained that Patricia had called her claiming that Brandon wanted to reconnect with old friends and had specifically requested her presence at the wedding. Stephanie had been manipulated, just as I had been used as a pawn in Patricia's game to maintain control over her son's life. My career took an unexpected turn for the better after the wedding incident. My boss, who had attended the reception as a guest of one of Brandon's business associates, was so impressed by my composure and strength that she offered me a promotion to office manager with a significant salary increase. Apparently, watching me handle such a difficult situation with grace convinced her that I had the leadership qualities she needed in her practice. Several other wedding guests reached out to me as well. Women who had been in similar situations with controlling in-laws or manipulative family members. We formed an unexpected support network, meeting regularly for coffee and becoming genuine friends. It turned out that many people in Patricia's social circle had been intimidated by her behavior for years, and my public stand against her gave others the courage to speak up as well. Emma adjusted to our return to single life much better than I had expected. She admitted that she had never felt comfortable around Patricia, who had made her feel like she was always doing something wrong. Without the tension of trying to blend our family with Brandon's complicated dynamics, Emma flourished in her school activities and friendships. The healing process wasn't immediate or easy. I started seeing a therapist who helped me understand the patterns that had led me to accept Patricia's treatment and Brandon's failure to protect me. I learned about emotional manipulation, boundary setting, and the importance of recognizing my own worth rather than seeking validation from others. 2 years later, my life looks completely different than I ever imagined it could. Emma is thriving in 4th grade, confident and happy in a way that makes my heart sing every day. I've been promoted again at work and am now making more money than I ever thought possible as a single mother. We moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Most surprisingly, I've started dating again, but this time with a much clearer understanding of what I will and won't accept in a relationship. I met David at Emma's school, where he volunteers as a reading tutor while working as a pediatric nurse. He treats both Emma and me with consistent kindness and respect, never making me feel like I need to prove my worth or apologize for my past. The day I thought would destroy me actually set me free from a situation that would have slowly eroded my self-respect for years to come. I learned that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best transformations, and that a single mother who has already survived abandonment possesses a strength that can't be broken by social humiliation or family manipulation. Looking back, I realized that Patricia did me the greatest favor of my life by showing me exactly who she and Brandon really were before I wasted years trying to fit into their world. That wedding reception taught me that I would rather be alone with my dignity intact than married to someone who won't defend me when I need protection most. Emma and I have built a beautiful life together, one based on mutual respect, unconditional love, and the understanding that we are both worthy of being treated with kindness. We may not have the traditional family structure I once thought we needed, but we have something much more valuable: genuine happiness and self-respect. I want to leave you with this thought: never let anyone convince you to accept less respect than you deserve, especially not in the name of love or family harmony. The right people will value you enough to stand up for you when it matters most, and the wrong people will reveal themselves when you need them least. Trust me when I say that the pain of standing up for yourself is temporary, but the regret of allowing yourself to be diminished lasts much longer. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for your dignity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when you found the strength to walk away from people who didn't value your worth. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that they are worthy of respect and love. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the ending you didn't plan turns out to be exactly the beginning you needed. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.